It was just another slow afternoon at the small-town diner where Emily worked the lunch shift. She'd been there for years, serving coffee with a smile, remembering regulars' orders by heart, and trying to stretch every dollar to keep the lights on at her modest apartment. Nothing out of the ordinary ever really happened in that place. But that all changed the day a sleek black car pulled up to the curb and an unfamiliar face struggled to open the door. He looked out of place from the moment he rolled in, clearly wealthy, sharply dressed, but seated in a wheelchair that he maneuvered with effort. The man didn't ask for help. He simply ordered his food quietly and waited outside in his car. Emily noticed he hadn't eaten anything, just sat there, staring at the plate through the window like the effort of coming inside had been too much. She didn't think twice. She picked up his food, walked it out to him with a warm smile, and asked if he needed anything else. He seemed surprised, grateful, but distant. She didn't ask questions. She didn't see a billionaire. She just saw someone who looked like he was having a rough day. Emily thought that was the end of it. Just another customer, another small act of kindness. But something about that moment stuck with her. Maybe it was the look in his eyes, tired, but watching her closely, like he wasn't used to people treating him like a person instead of a headline. Over the next few weeks, the man came back a few times. Always in that same car, always sitting outside. Emily always brought in his food, sometimes staying for a quick chat, other times just offering a warm smile before heading back in. Then, out of nowhere, the visits stopped. Weeks passed. Emily got busy again, life returning to its usual rhythm of late nights, aching feet, and counting tips. Until one morning, as she poured herself a cheap cup of coffee in the back of the diner before her shift, her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize flashed across the screen. She almost ignored it. Almost. What she heard on the other end of the line made her stop cold. Her hand trembled as she set her coffee down and listened. The voice on the line mentioned the man in the wheelchair. And then, it made her an offer that would change her life forever. But here's the thing, Emily had no idea who he really was. And what came next? No one could have seen that coming. Emily stood frozen in the diner's back room, the morning buzz of clinking dishes and low chatter completely drowned out by the voice on the other end of the phone. The man introduced himself as Mr. Donovan's assistant. That was the name of the man in the wheelchair, though she hadn't known it until now. The assistant's voice was polite but firm, like someone who handled important matters every day. He thanked her for the kindness she'd shown weeks earlier, and then said something she didn't quite understand at first. "Mr. Donovan would like to speak with you personally. Can you be available this afternoon?" Emily's first thought was, why mid she wasn't anyone special. She was just a waitress, working long hours to pay off a few debts and take care of her younger brother back home. And yet here she was, being asked to meet with a man who, from the way his assistant spoke, clearly lived in a very different world. That afternoon, after her shift, she stood outside the diner, heart racing as a sleek black SUV pulled up. It was the same car. The door opened, and inside was the man she'd brought food to, Mr. Donovan. This time she saw him more clearly, his eyes sharp but tired, his hands slightly trembling. And yet there was a calmness about him, the kind that only comes from someone who's seen more than they care to share. He thanked her personally for that simple act, bringing his food out without hesitation, without pity, without asking for anything in return. He said it had reminded him of something he'd lost a long time ago. Emily didn't really know what to say. It had just been a small thing to her, but to him, it clearly meant more. He didn't give too many details, but he asked if she'd be willing to come visit one of his properties outside town, just for a day to talk. Said he had something he wanted her to see. Emily hesitated. Her instincts told her this was no ordinary visit. There was something hidden behind his words, something unspoken. But at the same time, something about his eyes told her it was safe. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about a thank you. What kind of billionaire calls a waitress weeks later just to say thank you? And why did it feel like he already knew so much about her? Emily didn't know it then, but the answer to that question would lead her down a path she never expected, one that would test everything she believed about kindness, trust, and just how far a stranger's gratitude could truly go. Emily sat in the passenger seat of the black SUV, watching the familiar town fade into the background. The driver was quiet, focused. She clutched her purse tightly, replaying the conversation with Mr. Donovan in her mind. He hadn't revealed much, just that he wanted to show her something important. That word kept echoing in her thoughts. Important. What could possibly be so important that a billionaire would go through all this trouble for someone like her? The car eventually turned down a long, winding road surrounded by trees. At the end was a large estate, tucked away behind iron gates and stone walls. It was the kind of place you only ever saw in magazines. As the gates opened and they pulled into the driveway, Emily's nerves grew stronger. The house was beautiful, but it felt cold, like it had secrets tucked behind every window. Inside, Mr. Donovan greeted her again, this time with a quiet smile. He looked tired, like someone carrying a weight far heavier than his condition. They sat in a cozy study, and for the first time he spoke openly. He told her he hadn't always been this way, that the wheelchair wasn't from birth, but from something that happened 3 years ago, a car accident that took not just his ability to walk, but also his fiancée. The pain in his voice was raw, but controlled. Emily listened closely, unsure why he was sharing all of this with her. Then he handed her a folder. Inside were documents, photographs, papers, even a newspaper clipping with her name on it. Her stomach dropped. It was an article from 5 years ago, a story about a fire that had destroyed her childhood home. She hadn't spoken about it in years. How could he know? Mr. Donovan said softly, "I didn't bring you here just to thank you. I brought you here because I think our lives crossed paths long before the diner." Emily felt her hands tremble as she stared at the photos. There was a picture of her father standing next to a man she didn't recognize at first, until she looked closer. It was a younger version of Mr. Donovan. "I believe your father once saved mine," he said, "and I've been trying to find you ever since." Her thoughts raced. None of this made sense. Why now? Why her? Just then, one of the assistants came in, whispered something to Mr. Donovan, and quickly left. He looked away, suddenly tense. "There's more," he said quietly. "Something I haven't told you yet. But before I do, you need to decide if you're ready." Emily didn't answer, because deep down she knew, whatever was coming next, it would change everything. Emily's heart pounded louder with every second of silence that followed Mr. Donovan's words. The air in the room felt heavier, like something unspoken had taken hold. She looked at him, searching his face for some kind of clue, anything to prepare her for what was coming. But he just sat there, quiet and still, like a man waiting for a storm he already knew was on its way. "What do you mean there's more?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Donovan took a slow breath. "Before the accident, before I lost my fiancé, I was involved in something bigger. A project. One that wasn't as clean as I thought it was. And your father, he wasn't just a man who helped mine. He may have been the only person who knew what was really going on." Emily blinked, confused. "My dad was a mechanic. He worked on trucks. He'd barely left our town." Mr. Donovan nodded. That's what everyone believed. But what if he saw something he wasn't supposed to? What if the fire at your house wasn't an accident? The words hit her like a wave of cold air. She had spent years accepting the official story. Faulty wiring, a tragic accident. But now, all of that was being pulled apart, and the person doing it was a man she barely knew, yet somehow seemed to know everything about her. He stood up slowly, wheeling himself toward a cabinet across the room. From it, he pulled out a small, locked box. With a key around his neck, he'd opened it and handed her a flash drive. "There's information on here that connects back to both our families," he said. "Names, dates, money trails. Someone's been watching me ever since the crash, and now that I've found you, they'll be watching you too." Emily stared at the flash drive in her hand, the weight of it sinking in fast. What had started as a kind gesture at a diner had turned into something dangerous, something tied to secrets buried years ago. She looked out the window, half expecting someone to be there. Then came a knock at the front door. Not the gentle kind, but hard, urgent. Mr. Donovan's expression changed instantly. He looked at her with quiet panic. "You need to go. Now, out the back, take the drive. Don't stop. Don't talk to anyone until I call." Emily stood frozen. "Why me?" she asked. He met her eyes, dead serious. "Because you're the only one left I can trust." Outside, the knocking turned to banging. Something was coming, or someone. And whatever truth she was about to uncover, it wasn't going to stay hidden for long. Emily didn't wait for a second knock. Gripping the flash drive tightly, she bolted toward the back door as Mr. Donovan had instructed. Her legs felt like lead as she moved through the unfamiliar halls of the estate. Behind her, the sound of the front door crashing open echoed like a warning shot. She didn't dare look back. The back gate was already unlatched, like someone had prepared for this moment. She slipped through and dashed down a narrow trail behind the property, heart racing, lungs burning. When she reached the edge of the woods, a single black car was parked by the road. She didn't recognize it, but the door was open, and inside sat the same driver who'd brought her there earlier. He didn't say a word, just nodded and motioned for her to get in. She slid into the seat, pulse pounding in her ears. "Who are they?" she asked, out of breath. The driver finally spoke. "People who don't want that flash drive to be seen." The car sped off before she could press for more. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then, just as they turned onto the main road, the driver added, "Mr. Donovan told me if anything happened, to take you somewhere safe. But first, there's something you need to know." He handed her a manila envelope from the glove box. Inside were photos, recent ones. But they weren't of Mr. Donovan. They were of her, walking to work, picking up groceries, sitting on her apartment steps. Someone had been watching her for weeks. Emily's skin crawled. She flipped through the photos, hands shaking. Some had dates and times scribbled on the back in neat handwriting. One was marked to just 2 days ago, with a small circle drawn around a man standing in the background. She didn't notice him at first, but as she looked closer, her stomach dropped. It was her older brother, Jacob. She hadn't seen him in over a year. They'd lost touch after he got involved with some dangerous people, loan sharks, shady deals. Last she heard, he was on the run. But there he was, standing just behind her in that photo. And that wasn't the worst part. He wasn't watching her. He was watching the man who had just entered the frame, Mr. Donovan. The driver looked at her, eyes hard. "I think your brother's in this deeper than anyone realizes, and if they're following you now, it means he's made a move." Emily stared out the window, the road blurring past. The truth was bigger than she thought. Her family's past, the fire, the flash drive, now her brother. Nothing was a coincidence. And suddenly, she wasn't sure who to trust anymore. The car came to a stop just outside an old warehouse on the edge of town. The driver turned to Emily with a grim look. "This is where your brother was last seen," he said quietly. "We think he's trying to sell what's on that flash drive, but he doesn't realize how dangerous these people are." Emily stepped out, her hands clenched. Everything felt surreal. Only days ago, she was pouring coffee and wiping down tables. Now she was holding secrets that powerful people would do anything to erase, and her brother was tangled up in it. Inside the warehouse, the air was thick with dust and tension. She crept through the shadows, her footsteps soft against the concrete. Voices echoed from the far end of the building. She recognized one instantly. "Jacob," she whispered. He was arguing with 2 men in suits, one of them holding a laptop, the other holding a gun. Jacob looked thinner than she remembered, worn down by whatever he'd gotten himself into. But as she stepped closer, her heart dropped. He wasn't panicked. He was leading the meeting. "I told you," Jacob said to the men. "The girl has the original drive. We trade her for cash, clean and simple. No mess." Emily froze. The words hit her like a punch. Her own brother had used her, set her up from the start. Every photo, every moment she thought she was being watched by the people after Donovan. It had been Jacob's plan all along. She stepped out of the shadows. "So it was you," she said coldly. Jacob spun around, eyes wide. "Emily, wait." "No," she snapped. "You let them follow me. You put me in danger for what? Money?" The two men raised their guns. But before they could speak, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse. In a flash, Mr. Donovan appeared, wheeling in from a side entrance flanked by security. His assistant followed, holding a device connected to a small satellite dish. "You boys should really be more careful about Wi-Fi networks," Donovan said calmly. "We've been listening the whole time." Everything exploded in chaos. The two men tried to flee, but Donovan's team surrounded them. Jacob backed away, hands shaking, until he was cornered. Emily stared at her brother, a storm of emotions churning inside. "You were supposed to protect me, not sell me." He dropped his gaze. "I was desperate." Later, after the authorities arrived and everything settled, Donovan pulled Emily aside. "You were braver than you know," he said. "And there's one last thing you should see." He handed her a letter, old, weathered, with her father's handwriting. Inside was a name. It wasn't Donovan's. It was hers. Emily Donovan. She looked up, stunned. Donovan smiled softly. "Your father saved my life, and in a way, I've always wanted to return the favor." But what that really meant was a secret only just beginning to unfold. Emily sat quietly on a bench just outside the warehouse, the sky starting to fade into soft evening light. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the letter, its edges worn, its contents still sinking in. She kept reading the name over and over. Emily Donovan. It felt impossible, but also like a puzzle piece that had finally found its place. Mr. Donovan joined her a few minutes later, calm as ever, though his eyes were heavy with things unsaid. He explained everything in a way only he could, patient, clear, and full of weight. Her father and his had once been close, tied together by more than just business. In the early days, her father had protected the Donovan family during a betrayal that nearly destroyed everything. When the danger grew too great, he walked away, changed his name, and built a new life for Emily and her brother, far from that world. "I always knew I owed him everything," Donovan said, his voice low. "But I never expected to find his daughter carrying his same courage." Emily listened, still trying to piece together the last few days. Her brother had been taken into custody, but Donovan promised he'd make sure Jacob had a fair shot at turning his life around, under the condition that he cooperate and give up everyone he'd been working with. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. The flash drive had been handed over to federal agents. Inside were years of hidden financial records, shady business ties, and proof of the cover-up behind the fire that changed Emily's life. That fire hadn't just been random. It was an attempt to silence her father forever. But now that truth would finally come out. The diner where she used to work felt like a lifetime ago, and yet Emily didn't feel like she was leaving it behind. Instead, she was carrying something forward, something her father started, something she never knew she was part of. Mr. Donovan made her an offer before they left, a position in his foundation, one focused on helping families caught in the crossfire of corporate greed. It wasn't charity, it was trust, a new beginning. Emily stood, looked out over the quiet road, and smiled softly. Life didn't make sense most days. One moment, you're carrying a stranger's lunch to their car. The next, you're uncovering your family's hidden legacy. But maybe that's how it works. Maybe the smallest acts of kindness echo farther than we ever realize. And for Emily Donovan, it all started with one plate of food and a choice to care.